Herrn Professor.
Danke sehr. Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, ich bin sehr froh, zugegeben, diesen Vortrag heute hier. Und ich möchte bedanken auch Professor Cornelia Horn und Professor Armenische für die Einladung, für diese Möglichkeit, zugegeben, die Vorträge über die armenische Buchmalerei in Universität der Halle-Württemberg. Und heute, ich möchte zugegeben diesen Vortrag über die Beziehungen der Deutschland und der Armenien. Und es ist das zweite Mal, ich gebe diesen Vortrag. Ich habe gegeben diesen Vortrag in deutscher Sprache 30 Jahre bevor, wenn meine deutsche Sprache war besser als heute. Aber während 30 Jahre ich habe gegeben mehr in englischer Sprache. So heute ich muss gegeben auch in englischer Sprache und nächstes Mal ich hoffe, dass wenn ich muss bliebe hier 1 oder 2 Monate, meine deutsche Sprache muss zurückkommen und ich muss gegeben die anderen Vorträgen alles in der deutschen Sprache. So. Germans and Armenians. Historical and cultural relations of Germans and Armenians are coming from very old periods, and here are legends and facts connected with each other, and in certain cases, because of lack of Armenian sources, we are applying to German sources that preserved historical memory, which is not preserved in Armenian sources. So, I want to start this with the information concerning Armenian doctor and martyr Saint Blasius, whose worship was preserved in other European centers also, not only in Germany. And we know that before the 4th century, the relics of the Armenian doctor and martyr were brought to Germany by Christian Greeks and Romans, and their traces are located in St. Blasian near Freiburg, also Mainz, Trier, Braunschweig and Lübeck. In the 4th century, the missionary Servatius of Armenia proclaimed Christianity in the Rhineland region and the Low Countries. Churches in Cologne, Bonn and Siegburg were named after him. In the 5th century, Saint Dionysius transported the mortal remains of the Armenian bishop Aurelius to Milan after the Italian bishop had fled to Armenia, where he died. Aurelius remained in Milan until his death. In 830, the Baden-Württemberg Prince Notting asked for a relic of Saint Aurelius in Milan and brought it to Nagoldtal von Calw near Stuttgart. At the end of the 10th century, to be precise, on April 14th, in the year 972, the Armenian Byzantine princess Theophano was married in St. Peter's in Rome by Pope John XII to the German Emperor Otto II, thus becoming empress. After her husband's death, Theophano ruled for 7 years as empress and regent for her son Otto III over the German Roman Empire. At the end of the 11th century, Bishop Gregorius from Armenia founded the first Armenian community in Passau, Bavaria, and his student Engelmar was so beloved there that the Engelmar festival was named after him. And we were informed about Saint Gregorius at the end of 70s, when there was publication of a German lady married with Armenian, Gerta Topagian, that there were, during some renovation works in Passau, there were found these remains of Bishop Gregorius from Armenia. But also certain Bavarian legend testifies about the Armenian origin of Bavarians. And this was studied by a well-known scholar and Haig Berberian, who was secretary of annual Revue des Études Arméniennes, which is published every year, and is containing different studies of on Armenology written by Armenian and non-Armenian scholars in different languages, European languages. So this all is coming from German sources. And on one of his crusades, Friedrich I, or Barbarossa, the German emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, had brought a crown with him for an Armenian Cilician prince to crown him. The night before the ceremony, however, Barbarossa drowned, and his heart was buried in the Armenian Cathedral of Tarsus in Cilicia. Today, it's a mosque in Turkey, that cathedral, and his mortal remains were to be delivered to Jerusalem, but the city was occupied by the Arabs, and so his remains were taken to Lebanon. About this, we have also some evidences in Armenian colophons about coming of Barbarossa and dying in Cilicia, and this is testified in the colophons of certain Armenian manuscripts from Cilician period and from Cilician region. In 1198, the Mainz Cardinal Konrad von Wittelsbach, as representative of the Vatican in the Orient, crowned the Armenian Prince Levon I as king, according to Latin rite, and thus placed the kings of the Cilician state on a par with the European royal houses. It was this historic event that established Armenian-German diplomatic relations for the future. And since then, Levon I was called Levon Magnificent, and Armenian statehood was established again in Cilicia, on the Mediterranean seashore. And it lasted, Armenian kingdom lasted till 1375, when it was destroyed and conquered by Mamluks of Egypt. By 1209, the Teutonic Order had acquired property in Tripoli, Antioch, Cilicia, Cyprus, and Greece. And we know that numerous crusaders, they have married also Armenian princesses, and so the presence of crusaders in Cilicia was always during existence of crusaders' kingdoms in this area. And there is another interesting evidence, again non-Armenian, that in 1232 German Dominican priest Brocard of Strasbourg visited Armenian court of Cilicia and met Catholicos Constantin Bartsrabertsi. He stayed for a while in Rongla Castle in the residence of Catholicos and recorded very important facts about Catholicos, which are missing in Armenian colophons of Armenian manuscripts. And Catholicos Constantin was a great patron of Armenian book illumination, and the best illustrated, the most refined manuscripts were produced during his Catholicosate period, and due to him there was a blossom of Cilician book illumination even during next decades after his death. But the facts that this Dominican priest has preserved are for us very important. And person from another epoch, already from Armenian sources we know about him, and this was Israel Ori, a prominent figure of the Armenian national liberation and diplomat, and he sought the liberation of Armenia from Persia and Ottoman Empire. He was son of one of princes of Armenia, of Melik Haykazun of Zangezur area. During his youth, along with a number of other Armenians, Israel Ori looked for support among European powers in the fight of Armenians against Persian and the Ottoman empires. as the member of 7-man delegation created by Catholicos Jacob or Jacob IV and the support of Georgian king George XI, he visited Constantinople in 1678. When Catholicos died, the plan was abandoned, but Ori independently resolved to complete the mission and journeyed to Venice, Paris, and Vienna. He joined the French army of Louis XIV and entered into contact with the high political circles of France, in course of which he constantly raised the question of liberation of Armenian people from foreign yoke. However, he was met with cold indifference. In 1695, Ori settled in Germany, in Düsseldorf, where he established connections with Johann Wilhelm Elector Palatin. Hoping that the question of Armenia would become the object of consideration in highest diplomatic circles of European states, German prince sent Ori with a letter of recommendation to Emperor of Austria and ruler of Florence. However, since Ori did not have official authority from the Armenian political mainstream, his statements were disregarded. Ori departed to Armenia with the purpose to obtain the appropriate written documents from the Armenian nobility. And it was according to advice of Johann Wilhelm. In 1699, Ori, together with Melik Safraz, called in Angerakot a secret meeting, and there were participating 11 princes or meliks from Sunik region, where they agreed to officially ask for military aid from Western European states. Ori met with the Emperor Leopold I in 1700, who advised him that Russian support would be necessary for the success of his plan. Ori in 1701 left for Moscow. His efforts were useless, but since then, with Ori begins the orientation towards Europe for finding support, and many high-ranking clergy and princes of Armenia were trying to connect with European states during this period and later for liberation of Armenia. Foremost among the Armenian aristocracy in Germany was the Aretin family, derived from the Armenian name Harutyun, which means resurrection. On October 24, 1706, the ship San Paula sailed from Constantinople to Venice. Aboard was a 4-year-old boy who was carrying a letter from the French ambassador Marquis de Argental to the Polish Princess Therese Königund, wife of the Bavarian Elector Max Emanuel II from the Wittelsbach family. The young boy was the son of the Armenian Prince of Sunik from the house Harutyun, baptized in the Church of Virgin Mary in Constantinople with the name Hovannes Măcărtici Christopher Harutyun. He was educated at the Bavarian court, which, as the result of the Spanish War of Succession, has been moved to Venice and Brussels. 8 years later, in 1714, the Wittelsbachs moved together with Aretin back to Munich. Today, almost 280 years later, his successors are aware of their origins and are proud of their Armenian heritage. This family has produced important personalities, scholars, professors, high-ranking government officials, and clerics. They were related to more than 35 royal and aristocratic families in Europe, well into the 1940s, and one, Annette von Aretin, was the first moderator of the Bavarian radio broadcasting station. In Munich, there is even an Aretin street. And these successors of Aretin family, they are even participating in certain events of Armenian community in Germany. Coming more near to our periods, I want to mention the name of Albrecht Dürer. Albrecht Dürer in 1496 created this woodcut, which is entitled Martyrdom of 10,000. this is concerning crucifixion of 10,000 Roman soldiers who were crucified on Mount Ararat. And before this had happened, the Emperor Adrian and Anonius, they have came with an army to suppress the rebels in Gadaren and on the banks of Euphrates. And then they met strong resistance and were obliged to leave. But 10,000 soldiers stayed here, and they were converted to Christianity by the intervention of angel from heaven. So Adrianus and he applied to tribal kings, and with a great army they came, and finally they have crucified these people because they neglected to refuse the new religion. And this history is not preserved in Armenian sources. This is preserved in Roman martyrology. And this history is also illustrated by Albrecht Dürer on canvas in 1508. And this history is a little bit later, in 1515, was illustrated by Carpaccio, Italian painter. And the name of Albert Dürer is interesting for us because the first Armenian printed Bible that was printed by Voskan Yerevanci, an Armenian high-ranking clergy who came to Amsterdam to publish, to organize publication of first Bible, and succeeded in 1666. So Voskan Yerevanci published this Bible and used for that certain woodcuts of Biblia Sacra. And among the woodcuts of Biblia Sacra were works of not only Dürer but also Frederick Goltzius and others. And engraver Christopher van Zichem, he prepared this woodcuts for publication for Armenian edition, and we see his monogram and also monogram of Albrecht Dürer in certain woodcuts in this Armenian Bible. And this example was binded especially as a gift to French king, and it is preserved in France. Here is one of those woodcuts, and you can see here the next to each other monogram of Albert Dürer and the Christopher Zichem. It's here. There is another interesting connection of Dürer and Armenian. This is self-portrait of Albrecht Dürer holding a tistel. It's made in 1493, and the tistel represents the crown of thorns from Christ's passion. And he is representing himself in as an image, like image of suffering Christ. And this is a painter who was very well known in Armenia and who died because of a car accident. And they say that he was killed almost. The people were believing that. And he was like dissident and never accepted communist ideology and never portrayed members of Politburo or Lenin, or and he was openly saying, oh, Lenin is not Apollo, that I will portray him. And so his exhibition was organized here in Moritzburg recently. And a friend of mine who was quite often visiting him, he told me that there was painting of Dürer hanging on the walls in his studio. He was very fond of Dürer. And I have noticed that he has a portrait, self-portrait, holding a sprig of thorn. And I think he was inspired by Dürer. This is very unusual detail. And he was always very dramatic, Minas, and as we called the people called him. And he portrayed himself as a crucified Christ, and as if predicted his end. Here are his parents from both sides, and it's called Dedication of the Mother. He was the #1 painter in Armenia in 60s and beginning of 70s. Another interesting connection comes with Johann Jakob Friedrich Wilhelm Parrot, who was a Baltic German naturalist, explorer, mountaineer, professor of natural history from the University of Dorpat, today it's called Tartu, and he climbed Mount Ararat on 1829. And here is a person who accompanied him. And this is Khachatur Abovyan, Armenian poet and national public figure, who ascended Mount Ararat with Professor Parrot, and later in 1843 with Professor Moritz Wagner from University of Munich, and in 1845 with Professor von Abich from University of Dorpat. And this portrait is made by Ludwig von Meidel. And Abovyan studied in University of Dorpat due to encouragement and support and scholarship that Professor Parrot obtained for him from Russian Imperial Academy. And he became like a new illuminator for Armenians. Khachatur Abovyan in 19th century is considered one of the crucial figures, not only in literature, but also for reform of new Armenian literary language. And here is Otto Wilhelm Hermann von Abich. Before talking about him, I want to mention that Abovyan, when he was studying in Dorpat, he translated the verses of Goethe, Schiller, Heine, and he did it already during the life of Goethe. And he, in this way, he established tradition of translation of not only these writers, German writers, poets, but also other writers of German origin. And this is Professor Abich. He was German mineralogist and geologist, professor of mineralogy in the University of Dorpat, and he ascended Ararat twice, and second time he was with Khachatur Abovyan. And Abich is considered that as a father of the exploration of Caucasian geology. Even certain minerals are called by his name. And, oh sorry. And I think you are familiar with this image. So the Goethe was always source of inspiration for Armenian intellectuals, and Faust was translated into Armenian more than 10 times. And not only Faust, but also the other works of Goethe. And here is another translator of Goethe. This is Hovhannes Tumanyan, a very famous Armenian poet, writer, literary critic, national public figure. And he is considered one of the greatest poets and writers of 20th century. And many generations grow up with his books. Avetik Isaakian, friend of Hovhannes Tumanyan, he was also Armenian poet, writer, and national public figure. In 1893, studied in University of Leipzig and later in University of Zurich with a number of German intellectuals. Before Second World War, he founded German Armenian Society and edited its journal entitled Mesrob. He lived in Germany also after war, and so he translated also works of Goethe, and he has other translations also from German literature. I think you know this person also, and Schiller was very much translated by Armenians, and especially Hovhannes Hovhannisyan, Armenian poet, translated verses of Goethe and Heinrich Heine. And tradition of translations of verses of Schiller was continued also by Kerovbe Patkanyan, Revond Alishan, and many others. And also Alexander Zaturian. And this person was Orientalist, linguist, Armenologist, writer, studied in University of Dorpat. I have to say that many Armenians studied in University of Dorpat. With Khachatur Abovyan was started tradition of studying in Dorpat University, and he opened avenues for next generations, and that's why connections with Dorpat University are up to now very important and crucial for us. And usually those who are studying Armenian intellectual heritage of 19th century or beginning to 20th century, they come across Dorpat University. And since 1861, Patkanyan worked at University of St. Petersburg. He was member of Russian Imperial Academy, translated verses of Schiller, as I said. And Alexander Zaturian, he was poet and translator, and he translated verses of Schiller. And this is a famous portrait made by excellent painter Martyros Saryan, who was patriarch of Armenian art in 20th century. And I think you are familiar with this man also. His work very much inspired #1 poet of 20th century, Yerishe Charens. Yerishe Charens is considered #1 poet in 20th century, and he was writer and public activist, and he translated the verses of Heinrich Heine and almost worshipped his work. And unfortunately, he became a victim of period of Stalin, when numerous intellectuals were killed or sent to Siberia or died in jails. So it was like second genocide for Armenian intellectuals, 30s. Before talking about German scholars, I want to come back a little bit and talk about some event that took part at the end of 19th century. And this event is connected with the At the end of 19th century, two German scholars, one of them Karl Ferdinand Friedrich Lehmann Haupt, he was German Orientalist and historian. He made excavations in Van between 1898 and 1899 in Turkey with Waldemar Belk. And they were excavating Urartian antiquity and antique remains, and they have discovered Urartian inscriptions and prepared their copies. Among the publications, there are two books that have a great impact in Armenian studies: Materialien zur ältesten Geschichte Armeniens und Mesopotamiens, and another one, Armenien ist einst und jetzt, Reisen und Forschungen mit Untersuchung der Königlichen Preußischen Kulturministeriums. So these works were encouraging many generations of scholars who were dealing and also continue to encourage many scholars, modern scholars, who are dealing with Urartian history and Urartian art. And I have to mention, to underline that there are many German scholars who were dealing with problems of Armenology. Of course, in this one lecture, I can't embrace all impact of German scholars, their impact in Armenology, but I have to mention names of Johann Heinrich Hübschmann, Josef Karst, Josef Marquardt, and others, Heinrich Hübschmann. And Johann Heinrich Hübschmann, he was a German philologist, and he published works on Armenian and Iranian studies, and he succeeded to prove that there are many connections between Iranian and Armenian languages, but there are borrowings, and that Armenian language is a separate language in a separate branch of Indo-European family of languages. Next important person is Josef Marquardt. He was German historian and Orientalist, and since 1912 he was professor of Iranian and Armenian studies at the University of Berlin. He continued the work of Hubschmann, and in his own way he started to explore the history of Armenia, Armenian alphabet, and also Armenian geography of 7th century, which was attributed by him to Moses Khorenadze. And so Marquardt was a great figure, and unfortunately his life was tragically finished. And another person who can be considered as a great friend of Armenians is Johannes Lepsius, who was German Protestant missionary, Orientalist and humanist with a special interest in trying to prevent the Armenian genocide in the Ottoman Empire. He's one of co-founders of German Armenian Society and first chairman of that society, and his publications are concerning the conditions of Armenians in Ottoman Empire and persecutions of Armenians and massacres, and he published documents which are important for us. He established the orphanage for Armenians in Syria, in Kesap area, which is now a field of battle. It's a battlefield, that area, and many missionaries joined him, and including one of my relatives was working with him, Armenian, Andranik Gavukcan. He was publishing Das Orient in Bild. His mission was publishing Das Orient and Das Orient in Bild. These newspapers which were telling about activity of mission and about the orphans, what they teach to orphans, who is teaching, who is working, who are these people who are that are supporting him, working with him. And even there are some articles on Armenian art, even on art of Martiros Saryan. I have had a chance to see certain numbers of these publications. Garigin Hovsepian, historian of Armenian art and Catholicos of Cilicia, of the Armenian Apostolic Church from 1943 to 1952. He is one of the spiritual leaders of Armenian people in 20th century. He was first person who established the chair of Armenian art at Yerevan State University in 1920, but after the Soviet power was established in Armenia and First Republic was invaded by Red Army, new government, as was following ideological line of Communist Party, the new government didn't want to have anything in common with clergy. He was at that time already bishop, and he was young bishop because he even participated in Battle of Sardarabad when Turks approached to Yerevan, and Turkish army approached to Yerevan, and it was almost the end for Armenian nation, and so high-ranking two clergies, including him, and also military administration of First Republic, they did a lot with the volunteers and stopped and defeated Turkish army in Sardarabad, not far from Yerevan. And this way, the advance of Turks was stopped. But he himself participated in battle with a cross in his hand and with sword in the other hand. And for this he got earlier than the others the title of bishop. And before that he was already known as a philologist, as a folklore explorer, and also he established periodical systematic exploration of Armenian art, and different branches of Armenian art are explored by him for the first time. And later he escaped the terror of Stalin because Catholicos, understanding that there can be he is endangered, so he sent him to Europe, and after it he moved to America and became the prelate of Armenian Apostolic Church in America. And later he was elected Catholicos of Holy See of Cilicia, and after war he came to Lebanon, where is residence of Catholicos, and worked there and continued his studies, publications. So he studied theology and philosophy at the universities of Leipzig, Halle, and Berlin, and Jena, by the way. His doctoral dissertation was published in Leipzig in 1897, and this is the Entstehungsgeschichte des Monotheismus nach ihren Quellen geprüft and dargestellt. And this is the decade, this 90s of 19th century. This is the decade when Bishop Maraka Ormanyan, who later became Patriarch of Constantinople, but in 90s he was working in Echmiadzin as a teacher of theological seminary in residence of Catholicos. Maraka Ormanyan selected several young gifted students and sent them to Germany, and succeeded to get scholarship from famous oil tycoon from Baku, Alexander Mantasyan. And with this stipend, with this scholarship, this generation, representatives of this generation received high education in Germany. They became explorers of Armenian literature, like Tirai Iohannisyan. They became Karapeter Mkirchyan, Galuster Mkirchyan, and also Garigin Hovsepian, as I mentioned. And also, among them, Komitas. Solomon Solomonian, ordained and commonly known as Komitas, an Armenian priest, musicologist, composer, arranger, singer, and Chormeister, who is considered the founder of Armenian National School of Music. He is considered like a saint for Armenians, and our musical high school, conservatory, is named after him. And there is a street in Yerevan, and in 1896 he studied music at the Friedrich Wilhelm University in Berlin. He thereafter used his Western training to build a national tradition. Among his teachers were 18th-19th century folk music specialist Heinrich Bellermann, Max Friedländer, Oskar Fleischer. Fleischer in May 1899 established the Berlin chapter of the Internationalen Musikgesellschaft, an active member of which became Komitas. He there lectured on Armenian folk music and suggested that it dates back to pre-Christian pagan times. His studies at the university ended in July 1899. He was unfortunately also one of victims of genocide, because he was exiled with 600 other intellectuals to deserts, but with the intervention, diplomatic intervention, they turned him back. But when he saw that the work of his many decades, that he collected folk songs from different villages of Armenia, when he saw that part of his manuscripts disappeared when he was arrested, when he saw that people were perished and died in the deserts and killed, When he saw the tragedy, it affected his psychological state, and last decades he spent in Paris psychiatric hospital and died there. And there are many Armenian painters who studied art in Germany. And 20 years ago, when we just established UNESCO chair and art history department, I have organized one small symposium on Germany and Armenian painters. And especially Fine Arts Academy of Munich was the center that attracted Armenian painters. One of them, Theodor Aksentovich, he was living far from homeland, far from Armenia, and he is Polish-Armenian painter and university professor, a renowned artist of his times. He was also the rector of Academy of Fine Arts in Krakow, Poland. Between 1879 and 1882, he studied at the Academy of Fine Arts in Munich. He was awarded many good gold medals at both national and international exhibitions in Berlin, in St. Louis in America, Munich, London, Vienna, Rome, Venice, Chicago, and Prague. And this is only a small number of his achievements. And he has excellent portraits. He is a great portraitist, and his art is connected with Vienna Secession, Jugendstil, and he has very romantic portraits also of Belle Epoque, like this one. And there are some subjects on Armenian art. In London, in one private collection, I saw a big portrait of Catholicos Mokirtich Chrimian, and he has some other paintings which are known, like this one, The Christianization of Armenia. And this is sie ist sehr süß, ja? Another great painter of Armenian, Vartkes Surenians. Painter, sculptor, illustrator, translator, art critic, and theater artist. He is considered the founder of Armenian historical painting. In 1879, Surenians went to Munich, where he studied architecture at the Academy of Fine Arts, receiving more education in painting and ultimately graduating from the Academy in 1885. He even translated Shakespeare. This is one of those paintings that Armenians like very much, the Armenian godmother. But this one is like icon, another icon, Salome. And you can, sometimes you can see that young people, artists are standing in National Gallery and copying this portrait. Another important painter, Vartan Makhochian. In 1891, Makhochian began studies at the Berlin Academy of Arts, where he was trained under the directorship of Eugene Bracht and Hans Gude. Makhochian graduated from the Academy in 1894, and he lived then in Berlin also, and one of his first exhibitions of Makhochian was in Berlin in 1904. He was accepted into Berlin Artists Association, and after Second World War, he lived in France, especially in Côte d'Azur, and he was a sea painter, but he also painted some landscapes of Germany, even not sea, but some landscapes of forests and houses, farms, and also in Finland, and also in Russia. But mainly he lived in France, and here are his paintings, which are scattered in different museums of the world, and also in Armenia. And Makhochian is considered one of the best sea painters, not only in Armenian art, but also in French art of 20th century. And Makhochian was an excellent violinist, and he even created one piece for violin. And after genocide, during those years when Armenians were doing fundraising to establish orphanages, he was He has organized concerts in the cities of Côte d'Azur, in Nice, Monte Carlo, and other places. And the income that came from these concerts that he played, this piece concerning Armenian sufferings, this fundraising he did and gave money to organization of Armenian orphanages in Near East. Another important painter, Hagop Kojoyan, in 1903-1905, he studied at the School of Painting of Anton Ashbe in Munich. Then for 2 years at the St. Petersburg Academy of Arts in Russia. Ashbe trained the Slovenian Impressionists and the whole generation of Russian painters, including Igor Grabar, Vasily Kandinsky, Kuzma Pedro-Vodkin, and others. And this is a famous work of Kojoyan and Armenian Herald, and his art is also connected with Jugendstil. The Sleeping Persian Woman by Hagop Kojoyan. And I have to say that Jugendstil influenced numerous Armenian painters who even illustrated journals and books in accordance with that style. Sarkis Khachaturian, Armenian artist who in 1908-1911 studied at Academy of Fine Arts in Rome. In 1912-1914, he studied at the National Higher School of Decorative Arts in Paris. He left for Geneva to study pedagogy and then improved it in Munich and Vienna. In the 30s, Sarkis Khachaturian traveled to Iran, and in Isfahan he copied the murals of Safavid palaces and Armenian merchants' houses murals. Later around India, copied ancient wall paintings he saw at various Buddhist and Hindu cave sanctuaries. In the beginning of 30s, his expositions were organized in Berlin, Koblenz, and etc. So his paintings are also in German collections, and his paintings are in numerous countries in India, in Nepal, in Iran, in Russia, in Tiflis, in many places, in America, and he exposed in Sweden, in Russia, in Vienna, in many places. He made portraits of Armenian refugees who survived genocide and reached Caucasian part from northern and western Armenia, and he is showing people in rugs, suffering people who were dying in streets without shelter, and these paintings were published with separate book with introduction of Josef Strzeżigowski in German, famous Austrian scholar. It is the first Armenian book, it's a huge book, devoted to Armenian painters of 20th century. No anybody succeeded to have such a big book, and with texts of leading experts. And here is a copy of the Persian fresco of 18th century made by him, and his works were exposed in America in many places, and they are held in Paris, London, Vienna, Berlin, Brussels, New York, and other museums of Soviet Union, Georgian State Museum in Tbilisi, and in National Gallery of Armenia in Yerevan. Thank you.